And there we are. Welcome to Generation Movie on a Monday night, Monday, April 17th. Thank everybody for joining us. I've strategically placed the show all over the internet tonight in hopes to see if I had more people come in, and we have some other groups and chats that are joining us tonight, maybe. Welcome to Generation Movie, where we actually dissect a classic film in 4 different ways. And Rich and I look at all the different ways a movie is special. We're working on the Oscar Decade Cavalcade right now, and we have hit the 90s, my friend.
Indeed we have.
In celebration of the 95th Academy Awards, tonight's movie is, the only horror film to ever win Best Picture. Small potatoes. The Silence of the Lambs, Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, Scott Glenn, Ted Levine, Roger Corman, for God's sake. So many people in this movie. But we always begin with whatever the news of the week is. And if you like...
Well, first of all...
Oh,
how
yeah,
about
you had a big week.
Myself, huh?
Oh, you know what?
You were so excited.
I took a week off, and that's it. My name is J.W. Colwell. I host a podcast called Loud Nerdy. I also do a group called Loud Nerdy, and I'm known as the movie guy. This is my co-host, Rich Drees, who is very esteemed and has lots of things going on right now. Rich, how was your week?
My week was pretty good. This past weekend was the Northeastern Pennsylvania Film Festival, and happened to have a short film that I produced make its premiere there this weekend. It went really well. It was written, directed, and co-starred by your good friend and my best friend, Natasha Bogutsky, and
who will be joining us on this show at some point in the next couple of weeks.
It was a fantastic weekend. Saw some independent films, a lot of short films. Got to see a work in progress from documentary director Josh Fox, who directed the Academy Award nominated Gasland a few years back. And it's very interesting. I don't want to kind of talk about it too much.
Has it gotten worse? Is it something like Gasland, but worse? Because Gasland, for anybody who hasn't seen Gasland was a terrifying documentary about the fact that our water is about to be very polluted by very many people.
It's about to be made flammable.
Yeah. So it's not worse than Gasland, which is nice.
No, it has some environmental themes in it for sure. But it's a much more personal project. It's kind of like a new post 21st century Henry David Thoreau's Walden in parts.
Neat. That sounds neat.
It's part of it's about him dealing with long COVID.
That's
out in the woods. It's fantastic. It's very fascinating.
The long COVID part I'm very interested in, because I actually think
I'm sorry.
Long COVID I'm very interested in, because that is something that has kind of been impacting my life for the last, not my life in particular, but somebody in my life. So who hasn't been the same since their bout with COVID. So I'm very interested in that particular topic. So I will definitely look forward to that. But it was a good weekend for 8 years with Gelda, right?
Yes.
You guys had a great time. You guys looked very happy. Everybody looked excited. And what I was saying earlier was Natasha will be joining us in a couple weeks to discuss Gladiator, because she's a huge Gladiator fan, which is not, she's so petite and tiny, and like you wouldn't think she'd be a big pro Russell Crowe killing lions or tigers kind of gal, but I'm very
tiny,
excited.
but she holds multitudes.
Yes. And you're also still part of the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle.
Philadelphia Film Critics Circle.
There you go.
Yep. Actually, in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Film Society had like their little spring fling mini festival this weekend, and I couldn't get to go to that, but there was a lot of films that were going to be coming out in the next couple of months, like more independent fare and stuff like that, that got featured that weekend. So I would say if go to the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle website, follow a couple of the writers that are on there, and you'll find some great reviews of those films and something to whet your appetite for a few things that are coming.
But yeah, that's one of the things about our network, and that's something that the Indie Escape Network is something we're very proud of being a part of. We do a lot of stuff with, independent filmmakers and people looking to get their movies out there. If you like our content on our show, if you like everything about us, or if you like any of the things we do tonight on the show talking about the Silence of the Lambs, please check out our YouTube channel for the Indie Escape Network. Our show has its own YouTube channel, so you can go back. We do the same kind of deconstruction of every movie we take a look at every week. We look at production, we look at box office, we look at critical mass, and we kind of take a look at what the legacy of the film is. So it's a nice deep dive into some of your favorite movies. I know Silence of the Lambs, it shouldn't be anybody's favorite, but I'm a big horror movie person. So we also have a Facebook page. The Indie Escape has a Facebook page. By all means, check it out. The Indie Escape Facebook page. Super cool. Lots of good things going on. We have a lot of things coming up also that we're going to talk about later in the show. Joe Ridgely and I are going to be going to a PopCon, which is a con that's coming up. So I'm super excited about that. And it's kind of cool. There's going to be people from Harlow's Haunt, which is a movie that is getting a lot of buzz on our network and just got picked up. So a lot of cool things going on with the network. And I just want to say, when we get to do these things, we always start off with looking at news and doing different things of what's happening this week in the zeitgeist sort of thing. Oh. And if you're a fan of created entertainment where people write it and star in it and script it and do all kinds of good things, I'm going to tell you right now, Rich and I don't want to be the bearers of bad news right before we do our show, but what was the percentage, Rich? 97% voted with the WG. 97.95.
Yes. It was virtually 98%.
Yeah, 97.85. I'm sorry. I don't want to say it's not bigger than it is, but 97.85% of the Writers Guild of America has passed a strike authorization. And this kind of ties into all the things we love about films, streaming. But because streaming has become such a rampant part of so fast since COVID and everything, there hasn't been anything in place in the contracts to look at a movie that is streamed a lot, or a movie that is bought a lot via streaming services, or so the writers and directors and actors haven't really taken into account this. And this kind of it starts a little bit with the the Scarlett Johansson thing, the Natasha thing. It starts with the Natasha thing. It starts with Scarlett Johansson and Black Widow, and then it kind of reverberated out, because she's a big actress in a big movie for a big company. But it's essentially the same question that every actor and every writer and every director is now asking their agent. Well, if a movie doesn't get released to theaters, how is it generating profitability for the studio? And there's got to be some sort of equation around something that's streamed a million kajillion times on Netflix or Hulu or any of these things.
True.
What do you think? What do you think about these things that are happening, Rich?
I would say even before the Black Widow issue at Disney, you had when Warner Brothers threw their whole 2021 slate onto streaming, going same day as theatrical. They're trying. The business side is trying to maximize profits and things like that at the expense of the creatives. Specifically for the Writers Guild, they have some very specific concerns. A lot of streaming series are 8, 10, 12 episodes. You don't have that kind of longer run of your writer's room that you normally would have. And it's harder to get staffed between shows and different, from different shows.
Not only 8 to 10 episodes, but like Netflix cancels things after one season. So you could leave it. You could leave a very good writer's room.
You could be in a network show that gets canceled after one season, as opposed to a Netflix show. The problem is there's no stepping up in this process. You don't go from being a writer's assistant to being a writer to being a producer, where when you write an episode, you are on set for the production of that episode, and then you're learning more about the production and how to do that, and then you can become a showrunner and then an executive producer. And
it's very messy.
And these opportunities are disappearing right now in the streaming world. And that's going to hamper what we get later on down the road. So part of what the Writers Guild is fighting for is the preservation of this process, because ultimately that's going to, be for the benefit of all
the idea that you start out as maybe a writing assistant, and then you come in and you become a part of a writer's room, and then you lead a writer's room, and then you become a showrunner. Is like a track that everybody goes through.
It's a career path.
It's a career path.
Very regimented.
We do have some comments. Let's say hi to people while we're talking about this. Wendy's here. Hi, guys. Hi, Wendy. She has a wonderful show on the network. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Wendy.
Ken McKernan, our good friend. Good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken. This is the nicest thing anybody's ever said about us. David Madison wrote, "Hello, film scholars."
Oh,
I like it.
mortarboard on or something.
Yeah, well, just like a gown, a cap and gown. Yeah, that would work.
Oh yeah.
Wendy says hearts, which is nice. I always like hearts. And then Joe, good evening, gentlemen. Glad to see you guys back. Yeah, we were sorry about that. Little bit of a scheduling conflict. We want to make sure we can live our lives, but still do cool shows and make everybody happy. So I'm concerned about this writing thing. I'm concerned about the idea that we're fighting over money when studios are notorious for lying about money. I mean, you could go back to some of the writing fights. The idea that Coming to America didn't make a cent for Paramount, or there are so many things where we've had these
the Lord of the Rings films. Obviously, they were just.
but it's a crazy thing, and the thing is, it's not going to impact if they go on strike. It's not going to impact us right now because there's tons of stuff in the pipeline. We're all good, probably through maybe the end of this year and the beginning of next year, right?
Yeah, and I dare say that the studios have been stockpiling some scripts as well, because they pretty much know that there's going to be a big fight on
the problem there is the scripts they stockpile usually requires somebody to come in and touch them up to fix them.
My favorite example of a script with a shooting draft date that was basically the same day as the pencils down order for a strike is the first G.I. Joe movie. When I got a copy of that,
a missed opportunity.
I read it and I looked at the date and I was like, oh, this was the pencils down date. No wonder this is, so horribly unfinished. It feels rushed.
It needed 2 or 3 more drafts. But this is a big deal. And also it kind of ties in with anything going on right now. Cause here's the thing, the streaming process, the way, first we heard streaming was going to change how movies are made. Now we're kind of seeing, hey, we might need theaters, right? So it's all kind of tied in to the last 2 years in Hollywood have been under duress. And I think it's an interesting subject. I wish the studios would figure out a way to pay people the exact amount that they need to pay them in order to, because a lot of this fudging makes everybody nervous and upset. You know what I mean?
And we're just talking about the Writers Guild right now. The Screen Actors Guild basic minimum contract and the Directors Guild basic minimum contracts also come end their current run, I think in June or July. So
realize that most. But the thing about the writer, the Star Guild, right, the Actors Guild, they've already been, since the Scarlett Johansson thing and since the Warner Brothers thing, where Warner Brothers actually, they did right in the sense that they paid everybody lump sums of money. Hey, your movie isn't going to premiere in theaters. Here's money. Scarlett Johansson was more of a fight, right? But after that moment, most stars and actors in Hollywood went to their agents and said, there's got to be a negotiation part where it's whether or not the film was released, whether or not whether or not it makes video, whether or not it goes right to streaming, whether or not it's used to launch streaming services or to sell subscriptions. Because that's something that, while it's not something that Wall Street like Wall Street doesn't like subscriber numbers, right? At this point, Wall Street likes concrete numbers where we're not spending a lot of money on things. The idea that you could launch a movie or a show and it's something that causes subscribers to go, which is definitely definable data, right? If you have a show that premieres on a certain network on a certain day and more people sign up for that network on that day or after that day.
First click. When you're a new account and then they can look at you and go, okay, Bob Smith signed up for our service on Monday. And then Monday evening, the first thing he watched was this show. Yeah, Picard or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I want to give some of the smaller networks, the smaller streamers a chance.
Peacock.
Well, no, Peacock, the same thing. You can't tell me more people didn't watch Peacock because of Poker Face or Paramount because of Picard and Strange New World that's coming out. So, I mean, I just hope we get it fixed. One of the things that is happening, right, something else that's happening, right, is this utter domination, Rich, and I mean utter domination at the box office by a video game adaptation, Rich. How the hell did this happen?
Well, eventually they were going to get one to work.
I think that's what I think. But I was trying to explain to somebody, I think we talked about it last week on Loud Nerdy. It is the perfect storm movie, right? It is a movie that is hitting at exactly a moment where there haven't been any kids films. There hasn't been any kids films. There hasn't been anything out for families. And it just so happens that this movie is a 4-quadrant movie, right? Where we're talking young people, parents, grandparents, middle, kids, right? And it's dominating everything. It's hitting every age gap. It's killing other movies at the box office. And one of the things that put a stake through was a $65 million horror comedy that I saw over the weekend called Renfield. Are you surprised that Renfield tanked? Because I heard two interesting things that I was looking at. First, that it cost $65 million. And I'm thinking to myself, with all the cheap horror films that have come out in the last year and a half, something like Terrifier 2, or even to a certain extent the Scream movies, or Smile, or any of these movies, Barbarian, that all hit, they never had any kind of production budget like this. And some of the production budget is, of course, Nicolas Cage, who is by far the best thing about Renfield. But I read that somebody did a survey, and the reason people aren't going is because of Nicolas Cage. That somehow Nicolas Cage is now a causality to a film.
Which is strange. I mean,
he's still a star. I mean, he was on Colbert the other night, and he got a full 3 segments of a late night talk show, which is almost unheard of in this day and age.
Now, what's interesting though is, okay, he didn't open really big with his last film, the Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I think that's what it was called. Where he basically plays himself. With
great
Pedro
movie,
Pascal.
Pedro Pascal. It's a wonderful movie, by the way.
It's a fun film.
It's a really great movie.
Nobody wanted to see it. Which is, I kind of find it strange because I think in certain film fan circles, they still look at like some of his like more obscure work, like
Mandy, Pig, or Mandy. These are great movies. These are I'm at a loss though, because when I went to see it, so a couple things. One, it's a $65 million movie, which means we're talking that's a lot of money for a horror flick, Rich. And I'm going to tell you right now, like it's on the screen, you can see it, but it's not necessarily to good use. Like the more I watched the movie, the more I became disillusioned with, like, the jokes weren't hitting for me. His performance hits because it's an interesting concept. You know, rampant narcissist slash vicious animal is the best way to put it. But it's just this weird, for me, it's weird that Universal, who for years had the like, we own horror films, right? 30s, 40s, 50s, we own every horror film known to man. And now Universal can't make a goddamn horror film without spending a gajillion dollars, putting a star in it, and not knowing what to do with it. Somebody asked me recently about what happened to the Dark Universe. I'm like, and is Renfield part of the Dark Universe? And the answer is no, because the Dark Universe died with the Mummy, right?
True.
I mean, they were going to do a whole Dark Universe with all the characters, and the Mummy was
the story of the dissolution of the Dark Universe, and more specifically, what they had wanted to do is a story I really would love to work.
It's going to be a movie in 20 years. It's going to be a movie in 20 years. It's going to be like The Offer.
I have some notes on it. I've actually gotten 2 scripts, 2 development scripts that from there, and
we should do a show about that at some point.
They're interesting.
You and I should read the script. We'll review The Mummy in the background, and then we'll look at the other scripts we got. But I don't understand how we can have all these other companies making horror films and making bank, and you have a star and you have 2 other stars, right? Because Awkwafina is very popular right now, and Nicholas Hoult has a lot of good things going on Hulu and all these other places. And you don't open your movie, it comes in third. And the movie The Pope's Exorcist, which costs $18 million, outgrosses you by almost $2 million at the box office, while you're both getting pummeled by the Italian plumbers. It's to me, it's one of those weird, like, it's just a weird place. And we're in a weird time where almost any horror film can open and do well. Even something like The Pope's Exorcist, which didn't look great, had the same cinema score coming out as Renfield, and looked like B minus, and it looked like Russell Crowe was slumming. It looked like he got drugged and dragged onto the set. You know what I mean? So, but I will say, if you go to see Renfield, just bask in the fact that Nick Cage still believes he's a superstar. It's glorious. The Count thing is hilarious. Like, the stuff he does as the Count is funny. The movie itself just doesn't work, but it is one of those things. Let's see. We have a comment. I stopped watching Cage after the Ghost Rider movies. Yeah, but then you missed a really good movie. I'm going to tell you right now, Ken. I'm going to tell you right now, you missed a really great movie. There's a movie called Pig, which is a phenomenal, wonderful, amazing little movie. Nicolas Cage is in it. He plays like an ex-chef. He has a little piglet that basically hunts truffles, and somebody kidnaps his little piglet, and it could go the John Wick route, and it doesn't, and it's all the better for the fact that it doesn't. It's just this wonderful character story about somebody trying to get their pet back.
Pig narrowly missed being on my top 10 for last year.
It's such a great movie. I can't even. He also did a movie called Mandy, which is kind of like, if you liked any of the episodes of the Guillermo del Toro's show on Netflix, one of the directors of that show directed Cage in a movie called Mandy, and it's very Lovecraftian in its nature. It's a lot of fun. He did a bunch of them that are kind of Lovecraftian. So I don't stop watching Nick Cage. He does some interesting stuff, including this performance. Like, I think it would go down as one of the campiest performances of all time. But the last story is kind of depressing. We haven't covered it. We're going to cover it tonight. Because but it's going to be brief. So Entertainment
About an hour.
360, yeah, about an hour ago, Entertainment
Yeah.
360, which is one of the biggest star agencies in LA and in the film world. Um, Jonathan Majors is no longer represented by Entertainment 360.
Yes. Now, this is Deadline reporting this from a number of sources. Deadline 360 has not confirmed it. However, this feels pretty solid reporting to me.
It's
Because
also in
it's Deadline.
Variety. It's also in Variety.
Yeah. Oh, Variety's picking it up too.
Variety has picked it up as well.
Because I think right before I clocked on, before we started, I looked, and Hollywood Reporter hadn't run with it yet. But if Variety has it from their own sources as well, then
so this all, and also it also adds on that his former public relations manager, the lead company, has also parted ways and removed him as a client.
Now he had his trouble with a domestic violence accusation about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. We talked about it then, and we talked about how his lawyer said we have some video, we have some eyewitness accounts that support what he said happened as opposed to what she said happened, and ultimately it looked like he was going to be exculpated for all of this. The problem with this coming out now, I think it suggests maybe not, or maybe there are other accusations
there's something in the pipeline
and are getting nervous about.
Where it comes for us is it would mean that this up and coming actor starred in Creed 3, starred in Ant-Man, and was about to take over in the Marvel universe as the big bad.
Getting rave reviews of the movie magazine Drees.
He was actually having a moment.
Yeah.
So we're talking about this as, so the accusations come out. We didn't talk about it. We brought it up briefly. We're a month in. We haven't heard a lot of stuff about the accusations, although, there are many things on both sides. Now his PR firm is gone, and he's no longer represented by a certain agent. These are all things that are part of a line, and we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but it's something that had to be reported, and it was a major thing that happened like an hour before we came on. So usually when that happens, it's something bigger on the horizon, and so we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
We wish him the best, and we wish her the best, and hope everything gets rectified.
And again, the thing I always like to mention here is, this maybe could affect his work at Marvel. The Deadline report says there's been no conversations about replacing him, which is fine, but ultimately whether they recast him or not is a rather low priority in this story. I think the big priority should always be ascertaining the truth, and if he did harm some domestic partners, he caused
pay for it.
Harm or pain to somebody, he needs to face justice for that. And I'm fine with that if that means, okay, he doesn't play Kang anymore. I don't care about him playing Kang as much as I do care about
society and protecting people.
Yeah, getting their justice that they need.
But it's a very serious issue. It's sticky. It's and it's usually we talk about fun stuff, but Ken writes this as we get a little bit more serious, and then we'll get into what we're here to talk about, which I met in Wasp Quantumania today, and he plays the villain quite well. The movie sucked, but he did well. Yeah, the movie's all over the place. But you're right. He was a highlight. He was also a highlight in Creed. And again, apparently very good in Magazine Dreams as well. But another thing that's very good, Rich, what a segue. Another thing that's very, very good, Rich, is this little movie that came out in 1991, The Silence of the Lambs. So we start where we always start. Well, first off, a comment. Hold on. Hey, guys, Timothy Milligan. I might not comment on every show, but I do watch every Generation movie. Thank you, Tim.
You,
and we appreciate that. Thank you for Thank you for watching them all. We appreciate you sticking with us. Silence of the Lambs tonight. I know Tim probably has a comment or two up his sleeve for this one. But because Tim's died in his wool, horror movie fan as I am.
Okay.
What
before we even get into this, let me just stop right here for a second.
Sure.
That's the third or fourth time in a half an hour you've called this movie a horror film, and Ken is jumping right on here too. Is it a horror film or is it suspense? I look at it as a thriller, as a mystery thriller more than anything else, or a psychological thriller even. I don't look at it as a horror film. Yeah, there's some graphic-y moments, but it doesn't quite reach like
it's a horror film
for me.
I
don't know why. It's just
it's a horror film. It's a horror film. Clarice is a last girl. It's a horror film. She's the last. Think about it. She's the last girl, and she kills the monster at the end. For me, it's a horror film in the sense that every time you look at the great horror films, they usually have things going on. They usually have a female component. They have a male component, and things kind of mix in the middle. There's enough horrific stuff in this movie to make it a horror film. Now, it does have a psychological thriller going on within it. It has a cat and mouse game going on with Clarice and with Hopkins as Lecter. But I think it's a horror film, and it's.
I mean, you can say that, but it looks like the chat is agreeing with me. So,
who are the film scholars here? Okay, more suspenseful for me. I understand, Ken, and we'll talk about it as we go along. I'll try to defend my. I agree with thriller. I can't watch horror films, but I can watch this movie. Okay, so because you could stomach this one, it's okay. I understand, Kathy. I got you. The sequels are more horror for me. So
and I would agree with Kathy on that.
Well, but
cracking open what's his face's skull and forcing him in his own brain is a little bit more of a horror thing than a thriller.
Okay, or like ripping off somebody's face and escaping in an ambulance. Okay, you know what?
Then you're just saying Face Off is a horror film.
No, I'm not, and that is not fair. Do not do that again. So we do these things where we look at the productions, and they're always specific things when you're looking at the production of these things. And I always find it funny when you look at the production of something and it swims through the production, and then that's what we're gonna have tonight. It swims through, but I found a couple interesting, funny, ridiculous things. So, and I did double homework this week. I'm proud that I did double homework. So what I'm going to say is my most interesting thing that I found when they produced this movie. So first off, Ted Talley, who wrote the screenplay, later is an Oscar winner. Again, this is a Big Five movie. We've been talking about it during the Oscar Decade Cavalcade. Picture, actor, actress, director, and adapted screenplay. Ted Talley had talked to Thomas Harris, who had wrote the novels that the Lecter movies, all of the franchise is based on. And basically he had talked to him several times and had always tried to do adaptations. Now, they did do an adaptation in 1986 that Ted Talley was not involved in. That movie is a movie called Manhunter. Now, where it becomes interesting in the analysis for Silence of the Lambs is Manhunter was a Michael Mann film. It is a great Michael Mann film. It is a film that is ahead of its time in many ways, the way Michael Mann films are. But it was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, and it bombed at the box office. So when Orion goes to buy the rights to the Hannibal Lecter character, Orion says, "How much do you want for that obscure character that's in your Manhunter movie?" And Dino De Laurentiis said, "The movie bombed. You can have him." For nothing. They gave away Hannibal Lecter for nothing, Rich.
I know.
$0. It's why Dino De Laurentiis isn't around anymore.
Zero De Niro.
Zero.
He makes some good movies and he makes some really dumb decisions every now and then. And that's
this
the
is
story
one of the
everybody
worst.
in Hollywood, though.
This is one of the worst decisions in all the shows we've done, Rich, this is one of the dumbest decisions we've ever seen. And basically, Orion says they basically don't tell him why they need the character, but you have to assume if somebody's running Dino De Laurentiis Studios that they're going to produce a movie. So, whatever. But again, I don't think they have any concept. Like, once their movie bombed, and it shouldn't have bombed because it's a great movie. I rewatched it today because I wanted to see Logan Roy as Hannibal Lecter, because that's Brian Cox from Succession plays Hannibal Lecter in the Manhunter movie from 1986 on Michael Mann. So it's double homework tonight, kids. I really recommend both. It is definitely Manhunter is based on Red Dragon though, which has also been remade later, which we'll talk about Legacy. But first time the Lecter character shows up. So the most incredible thing during production is they go to Dino De Laurentiis and get it for $0. And then the other most interesting thing is that in the original development of this movie, Orion was doing a lot of work at the time with Gene Hackman, and it was developed as a Gene Hackman vehicle of him playing the Jack Crawford character, which would have changed the dynamics of the movie wholeheartedly. It would have been a Gene Hackman vehicle about the head of the special, investigations FBI. And basically Hackman when they finally get done with the script, Hackman reads the script and goes, way too gory for me. I'm good. I don't want to be a part of this. So they say, great. And they start casting. And then amazingly, I'm just amazed at this, Rich, that it starts out a goddamn Gene Hackman vehicle. And then all of a sudden, it becomes, through casting, it becomes this incredible, kind of a supernova of an Academy Award winner. Because Jodie Foster's super interested. She reads the book, reads the script. But Demme doesn't necessarily want her. He offers it to Michelle Pfeiffer. Pfeiffer says no. She didn't like the subject matter. He goes to Meg Ryan. Meg Ryan turns it down because it's too gruesome for the You Got Mail gal. So she's out. And then when Demme offers Laura Dern up, they don't think she's bankable. So then it finally settles to Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster is the fourth choice for this movie. So Lecter for $0, Gene Hackman vehicle that becomes the movie that we see. Jodie Foster, fourth choice. Has Jodie Foster ever been the fourth choice for anything? You know what I mean? Like, it's incredible. And
not after this.
not after this. Well, but this is the fourth. Rich, the funny thing here is when you say that, it's the fourth choice after she just won the Academy Award for The Accused. So she's not even considered, even though she's fourth after winning an Academy Award for The Accused. And that's before we even get to Lecter. The Lecter stuff is madness too, because Jonathan Demme wanted Sean Connery, which would not have worked in any way, shape, or form.
No.
It would have been terrible. And I'm in awe of fourth and $0. Not even $1. Like usually it's not even a Trading Places bet. Right? Not even a Trading Places bet. What about you? What'd you find? What'd you come across that you went, oh my God?
Honestly, I was just kind of vibing on the movie itself. I didn't do a whole lot of background research on it, but
it's good.
I will say this. When I sat down to watch it and I saw the Orion Pictures logo come up.
I miss Orion so much.
Exactly. I thought, my God, I miss Orion Pictures.
They made a ton of great movies.
A
series of great movies in the 90s.
Through the 80s and 90s too. I mean,
80s and 90s.
79, they gave us Time After Time. And The Great Santini, for goodness sakes. And, okay, Bo Derek and 10. But even just kind of rolling down through the 80s, I'm seeing stuff like Battle Beyond the Stars, which is being remade as Rebel Moon by Zack Snyder now. Caddyshack.
Never say that name on our show again.
I know, I'm sorry. Some stuff like Under the Rainbow, but they also worked with people like Woody Allen for A Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy and Purple Rose of Cairo.
Well, and
You
in the
get
'90s, they were
First
Oscar bait. They did this. They did Dances with Wolves, right?
First Blood, Zelig,
Yeah,
Strange Invaders remake,
so many
things like
great movies.
and then Hotel New Hampshire, Up the Creek, which was not a great thing. But then they turn around and do Amadeus.
Well,
And
that's what I mean. Like they were a gifted studio that somehow got absorbed into other studios to the point where they disappeared. But every time you see RoboCop,
yeah,
every time you see the Orion logo, there's usually a good movie behind it.
yeah,
which is amazing.
I know we sort of have like the next several months kind of planned out, but at some point I think maybe it would be great to do like a
Orion.
7 or 8 week run of Orion movies over there.
Just movies that kind of weren't part of big budget things, but ended up being really great movies. And then one of the things that comes up,
you want to do an hour and a half talk about Beat Street
and RoboCop. I would talk about RoboCop for an hour and a half, no matter what.
Easy.
But what I also would say is, Hopkins gets the script from his agent, and his agent's like, I don't know if I want you to do this. And he calls his agent 10 minutes after finishing the script, says, it's the best script I've ever read. I need that role desperately. Get me the role. And then, it films, like Ted Talley talks about how he wrote the script. It didn't have almost no revisions. And then they film. Filming starts in November. Well, he delivers a script in October of '89. They start filming in November. They're done by March. They film all over the state of Pennsylvania. They're also one of the only films that has ever given scenes in the FBI. Like they get a rare cooperation of filming on location at Quantico. So the opening sequences have an air of credibility, an air of respectability, an air of like real time, what we're seeing. And it just, they film on location in Pennsylvania, Cannonsburg, and they film on location Senator Elizabeth Dole's office in Washington, D.C. for the director of FBI's office moment with the amazing Roger Corman. And then what I noticed today also, and this is a production thing that has to be talked about, Manhunter has a bunch of people and people behind the scenes that end up working on the Silence of the Lambs. So I look up today and I watch Manhunter and it says costume design, Colleen Atwood. And I look up as I turn on Silence of the Lambs, costume design, Colleen Atwood. And they're totally different costumes. Because Lecter has no shoes and basically wears all white, is in a white cell in Manhunter. So I'm amazed that the same person's working on it. But like Frankie Faison, who plays Barney, who's one of those characters that kind of jumps out off the screen. He's a friendly guy in a really dark place. He plays Barney, the guy that basically takes her to Lecter's cell and back and forth. He shows up as a cop in Manhunter. And one of the FBI agents ends up being the guy who has the bug collection, who has that great moment where he's talking about somebody fed it, kept it warm. The really gross scene where he cuts open the death's head moth. So I was amazed that these actors kind of jumped over, and then but they totally changed the way Lecter's name is spelled. In Manhunter, Lecter's name is spelled Lecktor, and here it's Lecter. And I was like, wow, that's all Dino De Laurentiis gets, is just Lecter spelled way differently. I will say the Brian Cox performance it's off-put. He's definitely grimy in the movie, like not in a Succession fun sort of Logan Roy way. He's dangerous. There's a danger to him in it, although not nearly as dangerous as Anthony Hopkins. So production goes off without a hitch. They film, they fix, they release, and it happens very fast. Like I said, they finish in March. I think they take a year to actually get the movie ready, right? Is what it looks like. Because it looks like it's filming happens, it wraps on March 1990. So they release almost 11 months later, they release Rich. I think it's an amazing thing. The release date for this film, why it's a wonderful Beauty and the Beast horror film. It releases. Are we ready? We're ready for the next. It releases on February 14th of 1991, President's Day weekend, also Valentine's Day on a Friday. So get your dates ready, kids. Find a nice young lady and take her to see her brain be terrified by a thriller or a horror film. What is the chat saying?
For Joe.
What is Joe saying? Okay, so wait, here we go. Let's go through everybody. Ray Liotta's brain, yes, Tim. That definitely happened. Shutter still have nightmares with that scene, yes. Silence of the Lambs was a special place in high school freshman Joe's heart. Took a first day to it. Relation to end up lasting to my junior year. Really laughed out loud. Sure, she jumped right into your eyes. Let's see. Right into your arms. TJ Bowser, they turned it into a bed and breakfast. The house in the small town recently sold for about $300,000, which is a lot more than what people are getting in that PA town. But you can sleep. Just revisited the Red Dragon the other day. Now, TJ, did you revisit Red Dragon with? Oh God, I can't think of his name. Jesus, what is wrong with me? Ed Norton. Mm-hmm. Red Dragon with Ed Norton. Okay. And also Red Dragon with Ray Fiennes. He plays Francis Dollarhide. I would also say to you that this one is a little bit more interesting. The casting of Manhunter is really interesting because it's Tom Noonan, who played Frankenstein in the Monster Squad. He also played the drug dealer in RoboCop 2, and he's a great actor. He's huge. And the blind girl in Manhunter is Joan Allen. So it's Manhunter has a great spot of casting. They have Will Graham is played by William Peterson of CSI fame. Dennis Farina plays Jack Crawford. So I really would recommend if you did revisit Red Dragon recently, TJ, go find yourself Manhunter. It's a Michael Mann film before we know what Michael Mann films are, because it's got all the same kind of like editing and everything. But it's also really interesting, kind of a prequel to Silence of the Lambs in my mind. After Barney opens the bars like Clarice, and first prisoner she sees is the actor Don Brockett, better known as Chef Brockett in Miss Rogers' Neighborhood. In the IMDb cast, he's listed as friendly psychopath. Oh, that's nice. So not Miggs. Not Miggs, Tim. Miggs is not a nice guy.
It's funny because, every now and then productions that shoot in the Pittsburgh area, in the western part of the state, will pick up somebody for, from
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Yes. Because they were all talented actors.
Yeah. Well, Lady Elaine shows up in Dogma as a nun that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck kind of talking to giving up the clergy in the airport.
Well, no, and that's great. That's one of the filming things about Pittsburgh. And like I said, this is this film it definitely has a gritty location shoots. Pittsburgh is definitely, it represents Virginia, West Virginia, all the kind of places in the Eastern Corridor that are surrounded by forest and wilderness. But they do a really good job representing Ohio and all those different places. I would also say one of the things that I'm most intrigued, you were talking about rewatching it and living in the vibe of it today, right? One of the things that I can't get over, and it's something I'm going to call the Venkman effect. And this is a thing that I've made up, the Venkman effect. So at the beginning of Ghostbusters, Peter Venkman, played by Bill Murray, has a moment where he's testing somebody. And basically the theory is ESP ability based on negative reaction, correct?
Negative reinforcement.
And so his theory is true. Like, as he's zapping the kid, he eventually gets to the point where he says a couple of wavy lines, right? So it was working in theory. So the Venkman effect for this movie is, I don't know if anybody realizes, but the first time she meets Lecter, he tells her where Buffalo Bill is. And it's something that comes up every once in a while if you're paying attention. But she asks him about the pictures on the walls, and he says it's the Belvedere scene, from some Milan or whatever city he says. Mm-hmm. And where she ends up finding Buffalo Bill later in the movie is Belvedere, Ohio, which is... So he gives her everything early, and he's been he toys with her from the get-go. But the box office for this movie, Rich, incredible. Opening weekend, it opens opening weekend to $13.7 million. The cost of the movie was $19 million budget. It had a $19 million budget. It opens on President's Day. It grossed around $14 million from about 1,500 theaters. So a little bit over $1 million a theater that played it that President's Day weekend. So it did spectacular business. It ends up grossing in the United States and abroad. It ends up grossing $130 million domestic. It ends up grossing $145 international. So we're talking a movie of $300 million in 1991. And if you did the inflation adjusted for domestic box office, you're looking at a $300 million movie with a production budget of 19. So you're talking about it does almost 12 or 13 times its budget.
That's a hit.
An astounding hit, right? Like where you look up and you go, that's big. That makes bank. It does very well. It becomes the fourth highest grossing film in 1991, and the fifth highest grossing film worldwide in 1991. And here's where we get into interesting when we're talking about the Oscar decade cavalcade. This movie is released in February, right? And one of the things that has to be talked about is the incredible longevity of this movie. The movie lasts in theaters almost 10 weeks. It lasts at number 1 for 5 weeks, which, again, at this point in time, things were always coming out, movies were being released, but it dominates for 5 or 6 weeks, and then it lasts for another 5 or 10, like 5 or 11 weeks afterwards. So it plays forever. But because it's released in February, one of the things that has to be taken into consideration is the weird fact that it wins the Oscars. Because no movie that gets released in a February window comes back around to win the Oscar the following year. It is very hard to do. Considering movies usually for Oscar consideration get released in September, October, November, December.
Yeah. And so they're fresh in the minds of Academy
voters. In the minds of the Academy voters.
This, however, was such a hit. And
nobody could forget it.
Speaks to how movies kind of resonated more in the pop culture zeitgeist for longer.
And also this was on video. Very rarely do films that make it to video win Academy Awards, because at the time, and again, we're talking about a specific time in the 90s, when you won an Academy Award, it added X component number of box office. It was when you won Best Picture, it added $30 or $40 million to your box office tally, but this movie was already on video. So it speaks to how important it is that it lasted, that it got released on video and still was able to dominate the Academy Awards, winning all 5. Interesting. It's an interesting kind of story. Good to see you, brother. Good to see you too. I think maybe he's talking to Tim, or could be talking to anybody, really. Could be anybody. He didn't call us a film scholar, though. Boo, Joe Ridgely. No, just kidding. But, and one of the things I do want to talk about as we get into it now, critical response to this movie, it was fine early. And then as the year went by, it got more and more like a groundswell. And like we usually talk about Rotten Tomatoes. Here we're going to talk about Rotten Tomatoes. 95% tomato meter, 95% audience score. Pretty astounding. Both audiences and critics love it. I did a quick deep dive on, you know, when we have movies that are universally appraised, I always find the interesting thing to look at is somebody that doesn't like it. Mm-hmm. And there was a person on Rotten Tomatoes who gave it a negative review. His name is Jay Scott, very famous film critic, passed away in the 90s. But what I noticed, it's in one of his books, the review, and he's basically says it's a failure that is a function of its success, where he basically says the movie's so good at doing all these things that it's not great. That it's so good at setting up all these things that when it finally gets to the meat and potatoes of the movie, it doesn't work. But what I noticed about the review that bothered me even more, and I thought it was a typo, when you go to read the review, it takes you to an excerpt from his book. And he writes, Silence of the Lambs, a psychological thriller about a female FBI trainee, Clarice Starling, and a relationship with an imprisoned psychopath killer named Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter. Now, I'm thinking it's just a typo, but as you read through the rest of the review, he calls her Starling the entire time.
Okay, that's unforgivable for a number of reasons. The least of which is he gets a press kit. He gets a press kit when he goes to see a movie, and it lists all the actors' names and their character names with their proper spelling.
I hate to speak ill will of anybody, but he's one of the only reviews on Rotten Tomatoes that's negative. And I'm thinking to myself, he's writing this review, and he doesn't know Jodie Foster's name in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a typo, and then as I'm reading along, it says Starling again 2 or 3 more times, and I'm just like, I can't take this negative review seriously. So it should be like 96% is how I look at it, right? But for me, the movie, the slow burn, amazing thing about it is that it never disappoints. And I find new things every single time I watch it. You know what I mean? It's one of those movies for me.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in a good long time, so I was very happy to go back and finally get to rewatch it. And one thing I noticed, there is a lot of framing that's just like this. Person, center of the frame.
There's nowhere to hide. There is nowhere for the actors to hide.
Yeah, the camera's very much right there, and it's an interesting choice that doesn't bother me though. Honestly, I think if I had seen that elsewhere, it probably would have driven me up a wall. But I think for some reason it works here, and I'm not quite sure.
It works because he sets up the basement, and he sets up that there's something between them. So the idea that, you know, you're going to her perspective, then his perspective, her perspective, back to his perspective. It's kind of a fascinating way to shoot a movie. I was also like, as I'm watching the movie and going through it, is it not the greatest? And again, spoilers coming. Is it not one of the greatest edit sequences in film history? The edit sequence near the end of the movie with the FBI trainee going to somebody's house to get background information, and the FBI assault force going to a place in Chicago, the bell ringing downstairs in the killers. Is it not some of the greatest film editing you've ever seen? Because it's sublime.
I go back and forth on that. I think it's okay. It's really well done.
It's tricksy. I'm not going to say it's not tricksy.
Is it a wonderful way to fake out your audience, or is it just a really cheap trick?
Oh, that's interesting.
Womp womp womp. It was actually they.
Well, no, but think about that though. Is it womp womp, or is it holy shit? Like when you're sitting in the theater watching it, right? The edit happens, and I think you're right. Maybe it is a cheap trick, but what I would say to you is, it would be a cheap trick if it wasn't earned, and it would also be a cheap trick if you didn't care about if a shit about that character. But the moment you see she's there, you do.
Yeah, it's earned in everything that follows with Clarice at the house. Because if it was kind of just a bit of a womp womp and then nothing happened with her, then you'd be like, oh, fuck you.
Well, and it also ties
here-
back to the
here
beginning of
because-
the movie.
Yeah, because it kind of like you kind of get, oh, they're gonna catch her. Wait, shouldn't she be the one doing that because she's the hero of this story? It looks like the FBI team.
Oh
is
yeah,
going
she gets.
and now
Yeah.
it's a head feint that gets us over to this other thing. It can feel a little like, oh, come on, guys. But at the same time, I think for the most part, though, Demme redeems himself with everything.
Because the following 10 minutes are some of the most chilling ever put on film. Like the shit she discovers in that basement, everything that happens in that basement. Also, the incredible real reactions of Catherine Martin, the person who's trapped in the goddamn well. Just this like what I was smiling about when I was rewatching it today. Is there no better moment like when Clarice Starling's like everything's okay and she's like, not from down here, bitch. It's not. Get me the fuck out of here. This guy's fucking crazy. And I was sitting there watching going, her reaction is probably the best reaction in a horror film. No, don't leave the room. No, get me out of this fucking pit. I'll decide. No. You know what I mean? Like, and this is, of course, after Catherine Martin has trapped the dog down there. So you have this great moment where she has, wonderful success where maybe she can get out. And then it's, but Clarice is hilarious because she's like, everything's going to be okay. And she's not, no, it's not, you fucking bitch. Get me out of here. Like, and I'm like, it's a real reaction. I also think, any of the scenes with Lecter and Clarice in rewatching today, they sizzle. There's a sizzle to them. There's an underlying, like, they're so good and they're so like little snippets of dialogue where they're going back and forth, like where they're only focused, like you said, like on the camera, like right in front of us as we're talking. Like he rips her apart, like the first sequence where he rips her apart and he's like, you're more than one generation from pull of white trash with your cheap bag and your good shoes. Whatever the machinations he decided on how he's coming up with the voice, I don't care. If it's Truman Capote, if it's whoever he's doing, I don't give a shit. It's great. But and then she, she's like, very perceptive doctor, and maybe you should, train your high perception on yourself. Maybe you're afraid to. Like just the way they're so crisp. They're so good together.
And they're just only 4 scenes.
It's only 4 scenes.
Who are on screen, sharing space
but
together.
They're electric. They're electric scenes.
And that's really all anybody remembers of the movie is those 4 scenes.
Well, is
the general public, and maybe the wild horses,
Yes, the tuck. I think one of the things that needs to be discussed is that Harris, when he's writing these books and basically doing this franchise, when he's writing this movie and writing the book, one of the things when Catherine Martin is taken, I've always been appreciative that particular thing with the chair and the arm and the person trying to get something into a truck, that was taken from actual FBI case files. That's what Ted Bundy did to people. So when you watch it, you're going, he's a bad guy because he's got fucking night scope out in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, what the hell? And then you're like, no, don't get in the car. I think it's great that it serves as like a gentle reminder to everybody. Don't be dumb around bad people. Try not to, I can help you, but I'm not going to get in your truck. But everything about the movie, like I was thinking about like the way Demme uses music, like the wild horses thing, because that gets aped nonsensically, religiously now. But also American Girl has never been better on screen. Catherine Martin rocking out to American Girl right before she's going to be captured is one of the great things. And I think, Scott Glenn in a very interesting performance who's, we have to discuss for a moment. Scott Glenn went and did all kinds of legwork with the FBI and worked on a bunch of sat in on case files and stuff and actually learned how to do this work. Some of the critiques that do need to be discussed as we get older and as we look at it, Jonathan Demme's gone on record before he passed about, the idea that gay and trans characters don't get to be a lot of heroes, but that he was very definitive in that Billy, Buffalo Bill, thinks he's a transvestite, but he isn't. Right? He's somebody that hates himself so much he's doing things. So I do think that Jonathan Demme answering those questions is something that's interesting, but I can also see on the other side of it the LGBTQA community going, "Hey, we don't need anybody, making us out to be that, because we're not." Although Clarice does talk about that very openly in the movie, where she's like, if you're saying he's transvestite, most transvestites are passive. This is, she does use a lot of the scientific mumbo jumbo, but it is a character that gets made fun of a lot for a guy that wants to be a girl.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it does have to be discussed.
It's certainly not as problematic as some other films we've talked about, like the two homosexual assassins in Diamonds Are Forever. We've talked about briefly, like other, where homosexuality is equated to mental instability, like the murderer in While the City Sleeps, things like that.
Well, that's something I did notice today. Buffalo Bill is definitely not gay, right? He's not. Yeah. And because there are pictures in one of the things I noticed, because I have the 4K version of it, there are pictures in the room where the Wild Horses thing happens that are him with a stripper. So it's like he definitely loves women, and he's definitely been with Frederica Bimmel, right? So we know that. I do like that it's, one of the things that this movie does, it sets up the franchise, it sets up the serial killer genre, even on streaming, even on, it is still the gold standard by which every other, for me, it's kind of like, is it as good as Silence of the Lambs? Can it live up to that? We do have some comments. Hold on. Joe Ridgely, by the way, great shirt, JW. Yeah, save Ferris. I was trying to think, be happy tonight, something happy. A little bit dark. What about Rich's shirt, though? Rich's shirt is good. Directed by Jonathan Demme in full Silence of the Lambs artwork. And then after Hannibal escapes from the cage, seeing the guard hung up like a moth freaked me out. It's an angel, not a moth, Tim.
I could see. I mean, I
could see moth,
but thinking about it now,
it could be a moth.
I could see it as a moth because it continues that theme of that visual idea of the moths. And
that's interesting. Interesting, Tim. But yeah, I mean, that sequence, the whole Hannibal escape sequence is great. You got Chris Isaac, showing up as a SWAT team member. But that entire sequence is phenomenal.
Yeah. And Ken notes another fun cameo in this movie for us there.
George A. Romero had a small part in the film. Yes, he does. If you're filming in Pittsburgh, before he passed away, you had to have George A. Romero at least around your set.
It was the law. Pennsylvania
state law.
Congress passed it.
But I think the other thing about it, for me, this movie never gets old. The acting is so good. The script is so tight. The editing is phenomenal. And then you realize it won the top 5 Academy Awards, right? It won picture, director, actor, actress, adapted screenplay. Do you realize it lost editing, Rich? So maybe people did think it was a trick, a dirty, dirty trick. But it lost best editing to JFK, which is interesting to me because that movie's 3 hours long. But I guess if you're
there's a lot of edits in 3 hours there.
Yeah, there is. Well, there's a Zapruder film. I was thinking, as you're thinking about it. But that movie won best editing. But I do think it's still the gold standard, and it's the standard by which we judge almost acting performances, right? Because Lecter, as we talk about the legacy of this movie, right? Lecter is voted #1 film villain of all time, and he only has 4 scenes in this movie, Rich. You know what I mean? He has 4 scenes and an extended ending. That's a great ending for a character that they totally changed from the book. The Chilton character becomes a total bad guy, and he gets what he deserves. I guess if you feel he deserves to be eaten for being a jerk. But the legacy of this movie, we talk about the sequels, we talk about this particular franchise. You have the Hannibal sequel. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think Hannibal goes after, I think, Hannibal Lecter goes after Chilton because he admires Starling, and when he saw Chilton try to take
disrespectful.
thought he was disrespectful, trying to take the credit away from her, and he was like, "Well, no, I'm gonna fuck you up now because of that."
That's interesting. I always thought he went after children
weird
because
code of honor, but that feels right for the character to me.
Oh, it does. No, I'm a big proponent, and Chilton deserves everything he gets. Whatever horrific dinner party he gets to go to, he deserves. But I never viewed it that he maybe does it as a protection of her honor, but as more of a this guy really, he rubbed me all the wrong, like everything that Lecter represents with regards to being civil, being respectful. Chilton is the opposite of it. So the reason Chilton doesn't get to have any cool surveys with him or do anything cool with them is because Lecter's made the decision that he's just not worthy. And then when he finally after the disrespect that happens, maybe it is the disrespect as Clarice. That's an interesting take. That's a great take, actually. But this movie, unfortunately, it is great, but it also spawns a series of things that are diminished returns. This is very much the Alien franchise, just diminishing returns in the sense that when the sequel to Silence of the Lambs comes out in paperback and in book form, Jodie Foster wants no part of it because it essentially makes Clarice she didn't like how it took what she viewed as a prime hero into somebody that might or could have fallen in love with Hannibal Lecter a little bit too much. So we get the Hannibal sequel released in 2001. Julianne Moore replaces Jodie Foster, and it's a considerable step down. Hopkins still does well as Lecter, but he has the great stuff with the Italian detective and the Medici ties, and he's teaching Italian art. But it also produces a series of produces Red Dragon gets produced because of this. Basically because Lecter was in Red Dragon, which was he was also in Manhunter. So Red Dragon gets reproduced by the company that owns the Lecter rights now. Lecter becomes a bigger part of that movie, with scenes with Ed Norton and scenes with Ralph Fiennes. And then we also get a young Lecter film. We get Hannibal Rising, which is basically Hannibal the teen years, where how he became just this awful nobody wants. It's very much like that old comic who said, I don't want anything. I don't want to know about how Vader became Vader. I just want Vader. Hannibal Rising is basically
that bit.
Yes. I don't need to know how my ice cream becomes ice cream. I just need the ice cream. So we get Hannibal Rising, which is bad. One of the other legacies and franchise things that come up is an amazing adaptation of Hannibal on television. The Hannibal TV series, which runs on NBC from 2013 to 2015, is pretty great. With Mads Mikkelsen playing Hannibal Lecter, Hugh Dancy playing Will Graham. It is not for the faint of heart. It is an NBC show in name only. It plays like a cable show. It's dark. There's lots of violence. There's lots of cuisine. It's not easy to watch. But it basically takes place before Red Dragon, before the Silence of the Lambs. And then later seasons, it kind of picks up different, trains of thought where it does a piece of the Hannibal script and it does a piece of the Silence of the Lambs script. And although Silence of the Lambs was never really owned by them, so they aren't able to incorporate Clarice into it. But this franchise goes on, and Thomas Harris there's always the possibility that we'll get some other Lecter thing, although now Hopkins is probably too old to play the character, but the legacy also stems to the Oscars. It is winner of the Big Five. It's one of 3 movies to do that. 100 Heroes, 100 Villains. Clarice Starling is the number 1 hero. It's number 6 hero. Lecter's the number 1 villain. Buffalo Bill made a surprising strong turn on many a poll for that. So Buffalo Bill, he's the villain of the piece, but he's not necessarily the villain that's remembered. Although I would argue that Ted Levine's performance is pretty great by standard.
Yeah.
Like, it's a pretty great performance. It's scary,
and
but
you
also
don't get a whole lot of him either until right up towards the end.
yeah,
Really,
you get
little drips here and there, but it still feels like we spend more time with Hopkins than we do with him. And maybe sometime I'm going to go through and just clock each person's screen time.
It's not long. It's very much a network. There's not a lot of screen time for these people that won awards for it. But it is part of the 100 Years, 100 Movies at AFI, number 65. It is the number 5 ranked thriller. When they did 100 Years, 100 Thrills. They both placed. It is also one of the greatest 100 movie quotes, number 21, which of course is, Census Taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, just to try to get it right. And then, it is also started in a series of lists. But basically it also got picked by Library of Congress. So it's a movie that's saved. It's a movie that is going to be preserved in amber. And it's a movie you can show people today where you go, it still packs a jolt. I don't know how you felt about it watching it today, but I'm watching it going, this is a really good movie. It's solid from beginning to end. Foster's really good in it. And I think the interesting legacy for Foster is we're about to get Jodie Foster going after a serial killer again, because Max just announced that she's part of True Detective in Alaska, which, is everything kind of stems away from it. But you can't tell me you don't get a little bit excited about Jodie Foster with a gun hunting somebody down, trying to figure out who killed somebody. And it's kind of like a Pavlovian response when you see the trailer for New True Detective. But now here's a question for you, because I think it's an interesting we should add to legacy and franchise viability. Can this movie be remade?
Wow. Anything can be remade. Can it be remade well that makes it an equal or even a better?
Because this is a rising thing that's happening. Because now we're getting to the point where we're going to try to start remaking really great movies. Like we're at a point where we're making movies that were okay, and movies that people kind of semi-loved on their own, and they want to take a crack at it. But with the announcement a couple weeks ago, before we missed last week, the announcement a couple weeks ago that we're going to try to remake Vertigo, and we're going to try to is this a movie that can be remade? Can you replicate the two performances in the lead? Now Mickelson is a totally different Lecter, right? He's younger. He's a little bit, I dare I say, sexier, right? As Hannibal, right?
Yeah.
He's a little bit more charming.
So he does prove you can play this character in a different way.
Yes.
Make it your own distinctive
I don't think he's the character you can't replicate.
Yeah.
I think the character you can't replicate, and it's already been proven, I think Foster is the character you can't replicate. Their connection, their buzz, he's doing an accent, she's doing an accent, and then Julianne Moore tries the same accent, and you're watching Julianne Moore and Hannibal, and you're like, I don't like the accent. And it's Julianne Moore's actual accent.
It's not the accent so much. It's the chemistry between the two. So if you have somebody playing Lecter, playing him a different way, but still just as charming and yet deadly, like a cobra, if you will. And that actor has chemistry with whoever's playing the new person playing Clarice. I would think almost by nature, her performance would be something a little bit different than whatever Jodie Foster was doing. Because if he's doing something different and creating a chemistry, she has to be almost. Well,
I was also looking at how Brian Cox played him in The Manhunter, and he's he's suave and sophisticated, but he's also like he's in complete denial that he was captured by William Peterson in the movie. So it's like this weird. He has the same kind of shield. Like he constantly in the Manhunter movie asks Will Graham, how did you catch me? He's constantly asking him it, and William Peterson's like, well, because you had it. He has a great scene where he's like, I just need you to tell me how you caught me. He goes, well, you had something going against you. He goes, what did I have going against me? Well, you're a complete sociopath. You're insane. Like, that's a negative, Dr. Lecter. That's why I got caught, because you were crazy and I wasn't. So I mean, I think the Mickelson giving the opening, you know, the idea that he's the suave dinner party throwing, you know, serving leg of lamb that's not leg of lamb. Because that's the one thing about the Hannibal show is that it's very like Top Chef Silence of the Lambs. You know what I mean? Like it's because he starts every episode with some sort of recipe that he's working on, and whoever he kills in the episode ends up like at a dinner party, not as a guest. So there's a perversion to it where he's feeding people to other people, characters you love, and you're like, no, don't eat that. Oh. So that's interesting. I think the Clarice thing would be harder to replicate only because I think Foster really wanted the role, and Foster really, you know, she comes across like you see her in The Accused and you see her in this, and she's totally different. Like there's a total different structure to her, and she's just one of the things that you come out for me that I come out watching this movie. She's probably one of our best actresses that we're ever gonna in our generation.
And she projects a very strong aura of hidden vulnerability. Like, you know, the character is presenting
smart,
as a strong person,
strong,
but they're still
not
very
perfect.
Inside. And
well, and that's also
that is what allows Hannibal to find the chink in her armor and just go right in there.
Well, and also that's one of the other criticisms of the movie. We talked about the LGBTQA criticism. One of the other criticisms of the movie is that while she is a feminist hero, she doesn't necessarily do anything. And I was watching the movie today, and I'm like, her sequence where I felt that the sequence where she's talking to the cops and Scott Glenn kind of comes in and just, you know, kind of not shushes her, but basically, you know, has the cops kind of like, you know, talking, and she basically gets him in the car, and he's like, you really got riled up today. And she's like, well, the way you treat me is the way they're going to treat me. Right. And so we're talking about a profession, FBI, which isn't normally associated with being female. And she basically tells him, hey, how you treat other people. And this was before we got into any kind of a feminist, you know, strong point with female characters. We've had a lot of strong female characters, but I think that sequence with him is really interesting because she's basically, not only is she the strong female character, but she's imploring and making men change for her. So I take a different tact on that particular thing, where people go, it's a weakness of the film. I think it's a strength because she's actually changing other people.
Yeah.
Like, if you talk to me like that, I'm going to get talked to them like that, and we need to fix that. That needs to be fixed. And that's why I was pissed off today. But you can't tell her because she always has like a witty smile and a kind of like could have gotten that right kind of thing. But it's a great movie. It's well done. It's amazingly directed by Jonathan Demme, who's one of our great directors. Could almost direct anything. You know what I mean? And I just you know, the legacy of this movie is that it sets the bar so high for serial killer movies that we're still talking about. Like, for me, it's still, hey, is that serial killer movie or that serial killer show or what I'm watching, is it as good as Silence of the Lambs? Can it get into that stratosphere of being squirmy but well written, character piece, understand, you know what I mean? The understanding that Thomas Harris put into these incredible novels he made about the psyche of crazy people. Let's see. Hold on. We got a comment. Tim cites after Diane Baker's character says, "Take that thing back to Baltimore." Hannibal had a great line when he said, "Love your suit." That entire sequence with Lecter is fantastic because Chilton is brought in there. It's a terrifying scene. Also, for anybody who ever wonders about that particular mask, if you're looking for it, a person designed it and he sold thousands of masks after he designed it. He was a guy who basically he sold hockey masks. He sold hockey masks for goalies, and it's a revised goalie mask. Amazing.
And I would say that, Tim brings up a point here too. It's a funny line, "Love your suit." And I think Hannibal, gets some quips here. It's not like punny quips or things like that, but he has a very dry, droll sense of humor. And he uses it to taunt people. And I think the thing that gets overlooked about this movie is it has moments where it's funny. I mean, it has moments where you chuckle at what somebody says.
Well, he's so charming and evil. Like, my favorite line, and something that doesn't get a lot of play, but I'm going to give it to you. There's a moment where he says something to her, and her response, and this is after Miggs has killed himself in his cell, after swallowing his own tongue, after Lecter has talked to him for the disrespectful behavior that he did to Clarice on the first day he met her. She basically says, that's something Miggs would say. And the camera looks at him, and he looks over at the cell, and he's like, "Well, not anymore." And she realizes she said it, and she kind of just puts her head down, like, knowing that she got that guy killed, or knowing that he killed that guy for her. And later on, that's one of the interesting things about her performance is as the things pile up, other people don't know that he's doing things for her, right?
Which is further evidence for my reasoning.
Chilton theory. It's an interesting theory. I think he's just killing Chilton because he despises Chilton. I think he despises. It's a twofer. It's a twofer. Yeah, I like the theory. I'm not saying I don't like the theory. I just think Chilton was going to be on that list, that short list. Anyway, okay. Speaking of short list, now we've been doing the Oscar Decade Cavalcade, and we're finishing up tonight. But every once in a while, something happens where it kind of coincides with the show, so we have to put the Oscar Decade Cavalcade off for a week because of something big that's happened in our sphere. A sphere that I'm very well accommodating for. And our movie next week, and again, it was gonna be this, and it will be this at some point. Where's it at? It will be this in 2 weeks. Let me move that banner so you can see it in all its glory. A Hero Will Rise, Gladiator, 2 weeks from now. But because of something that's happened that we had no control over and that we didn't know about, the movie next week is going to be this. So the announcement was made that Return of the Jedi is coming back to theaters on April 28th for its 40th anniversary. Rich and I, first off, it's going to get released to theaters for 1 week only. And Rich and I had to make a command decision on this. And while we want the Oscar Decade Cavalcade to finish and get through all the decades, great. But Return of the Jedi, celebrating its 40th anniversary and also coming back to theaters, leads us to say we need to throw caution to the wind and we have to do Return of the Jedi next week so we can go over it before it comes out and you get a chance to see it back on the big screen. Now, it is the special edition. We don't know when they're ever going to release the original editions. If you need to, there is a DVD available. You need to get it. The original DVDs, first DVDs that came out of the special editions, have the original on it. But it's still a chance to see Return of the Jedi. Tickets went on sale today. Still a big chance to see Return of the Jedi on the big screen. And I will tell you one thing that freaked me out. They are running Return of the Jedi screenings on April 27th at midnight, 12:01. So I don't know what the fuck they're thinking.
That's incredible. But I will say this. I am a big critic of a lot of the changes to the original Star Wars trilogy when they became the special edition. Return of the Jedi is the one that's least damaged by those changes, and that's something we'll get into next week.
We'll talk about it. We'll definitely talk about it.
Get a new, run to McDonald's and grab something and come back or whatever he wants to do while I'm just blabbing away on that. But
the only thing I would say, the biggest change that I think upsets people, there's two changes in Jedi that everybody kind of gets a little bit verklempt about, and it's the Cy Snoodles band thing, right? Mm-hmm. That's a little bit awful. And what they did to the Sarlacc wasn't great because it was just a big mouth, and then they put a little stemmy thing on it, and it doesn't look good. But it's still 40th anniversary Return of the Jedi in theaters.
And some people don't like the new Ewok song. It's funny. The two musical things in there are the ones that set people off.
That set people right. And there also is some argument about putting original Anakin in. We'll talk about all of them.
Yeah.
But it's still a 40th anniversary chance to see a Star Wars movie that we haven't seen for 26 years on the big screen.
I'm getting some friends together from high school, trying to get together pretty much the same group that went to see it during the, the 85 re-release, 85, 86 re-release.
It's a night out. It's something where you get together with people you think about people you've lost that would have been there with you on opening night. And so a couple things as we end up. I'm having an old friend for dinner. Yes, Chilton deserves everything he gets. And Joe Ridgely writes, a fun watch you can find with fans of the Star Wars movies. I think it was somebody famous did them. There's a 10-minute sequence that cuts everything together. A 10-minute fan movie that basically has all of the Star Wars stuff together. So we're putting it on hold. Natasha will join us when we do Gladiator in 2 weeks. Star Wars Return of the Jedi next week for all you Star Wars fans out there. And also a chance to get ready and get excited about the fact that we're going to have a Star Wars film on a big screen 40 years later. Thank you for joining us tonight. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Before we leave, Rich, where can people find you?
Okay. Sorry. All my writing can be found at filmbuffonline.com. Got a few things coming up over the next couple of weeks I know people will be excited about. Can't actually mention them right now. But, as we go along, they'll be dropping and then I'll be plugging them here. I do a second podcast with my good friend Natasha Bogutsky, who will be joining us in 2 weeks for Gladiator. That's called the Big Picture Podcast. You can find that at bigpicturepod.com, or you can just go to Film Buff Online. There's also a link there. And finally, if you want to follow my nonsense on Twitter, as long as Twitter still exists.
Film Scholars, sir. Film Scholars. We're film scholars, sir. Yeah.
Yes. And other nonsense, like comics and some politics and stuff. I am at Film Buff Rich.
You can find me, of course, on Tuesday nights on Loud and Nerdy, the podcast. We'll be doing a show tomorrow night. We'll be talking about all kinds of nerdy stuff. We also have Loud and Nerdy the group and Loud and Nerdy the page. I also have JW the Movie Guy on Facebook, JW the Movie Guy on Twitter, JW the Movie Guy on Instagram, where you can find some ramblings. Yeah, it's pending, trademark pending. And you can find me here every Monday night talking about great old movies and some new movies with my good friend Rich Drees. Thank you for joining us tonight. Oh, 2 comments before we go. Let's see what we got. Oh, that's before we go. No, thank you for reminding me. This is coming up. We have a big show coming up on April 26th. Joe Ridgely, I'm so sorry. Forgive me on that. Pronounced a popcon. I was wondering if that was. It's in a popka, so I got confused. But it's a popcon. We'll be doing a live show on Wednesday the 26th. Joe Ridgely, not Rich Jolie. Forget it. We'll be doing a show on Wednesday, April 26th at 10 p.m. with a bunch of people that are going to be at a popcon. I think that's right. And that's a show coming up in a couple weeks. To go along with everything we do on the network. Sorry about that, Joe. I had it there, so don't get too mad at me. But that's coming up. Got a lot of good guests, a lot of fun things going on. Joe and I are going to lead that discussion and talk to some people that are going to be at this big con that they're doing on a Popka, which Should be a lot of fun. And Joe and I are attending, so it should be a good time on May 6th. But we're gonna have a lot of people on from the friends of the network, and that are also gonna be there. You're welcome, Joe. I'm so sorry, I forgot. It was right there. I had it though. It didn't have to go far. But thank you for joining us for tonight. Have a great night. Stay safe. Go see a movie. Go see something. Take care. I didn't hit it. I'm sorry.